but we won't be getting to the main bit of the presentation until a couple of minutes time. So welcome everyone to this Telefónica Tech talk on Power BI and Copilot. Hello to everyone I've not met, and nice to see you again for the people I already know and have met. Just to run through what is going to be happening and who I am. My name is Matt Gordon. You now have two pictures of me on the screen, which is probably too much, but I'm the head of data visualization at Telefónica Tech. I'm a principal consultant. I spend most of my time working with end users and looking at how to get the most out of data. So rather than the back-end data engineering, I focus on where data meets the end users and actually then being able to utilize it for decision making. And today's session, just a bit of, I suppose, general housekeeping around it. We will be sending out the slides and the recording to everyone within 48 hours of the event. You will see that there's a chat box somewhere. Any questions, you can put them in the chat and I'll pick them up either as we go or towards the end of the session. And you will find out you are all muted. So yeah, questions in the chat, please. So the rough agenda for today is here. So done the welcome. I'm going to do the presentation. It should take about 40 minutes or so, and then there'll be some time at the end for questions, and then hopefully we'll close before the end of the hour so people have a chance to get to their next meeting. So Power BI, Copilot, AI, generative AI. I think the main thing that characterizes the discussion around AI and these tools are really both hype and hatred. And the hype has been everywhere. Obviously, the vendors encourage the utilization of their tools and sell their tools and do demonstrations which show these perfect chatbots where people can just ask questions about data and always get the right answer. Various reports have been produced saying that it's changing everything. The way we work is changing. So there's a lot of hype on the one hand, and then on the other hand, there's a lot of hatred, and the debate on the internet, as all debates on the internet are, become very polarized. Someone will post something on LinkedIn, the chat will immediately explode with very polarized comments, and there, is genuinely a lot of debate and a lot of discussion, and there's a lot of expectation around it. So I think senior leaders in organizations, the C-suite leaders, any sort of away day or event they go to, they're told that AI is the future. There's been some research about the Standard & Poor, companies in America, which says that they will receive a higher stock valuation if they have a good AI strategy. Private equity investors talk to any of the organizations they're investing in are focused on the AI strategy. So there's a lot of expectation, a lot of hype, and that's at the sort of senior level of an organization. But even within organizations, there is expectation around what AI should do, raised by both people's personal experience of using ChatGPT and tools like that outside of work, but also where these tools work well, actually people use them and find them very effective. So I have the Copilot in Teams. It certainly saves me time writing up notes of meetings. I absolutely love having it in meetings, and I can see how that benefits me and therefore raises my expectations. So we have raised expectations. We have a lot of hype around generative AI and what AI can do, and we also have a lot of people who are raising serious questions about it, talking about the challenges of it, the issues with it, the problems with it, and discussions around it in both that sort of macro internet level, but also when I see them within organizations, when I'm in meetings with different people, they also reflect in that meeting that someone will say, oh, it would be really good if we could have this, chat experience where people just ask questions about data, and then someone else will go, yeah, but it will give the wrong answer, it will hallucinate, there'll be problems, and it ends up in a sort of debate which doesn't really take things forward, doesn't really lead to a conclusion other than that some people want it and some people don't want it, and it tends to not really deliver. And so I think what we're really witnessing is a classic example of Gartner's sort of hype curve. And I don't know if people have seen Gartner's hype curves before, but to explain it, they essentially map different technologies in an area. The one on screen is their hype curve for AI for 2025. They look at all the different types or new ideas or new products that are coming out in this. And I'll be absolutely honest, I have to Google some of the ones on this hype curve are. And then they sort of talk about how over the course of time, new products go through a sort of series of stages, really, starting with, the left-hand side where they've got their innovation trigger, where the startups in Silicon Valley and places like this are releasing new products, or at the very earliest stages where there's sort of early level research going on. And as this goes on, the expectations rise and they hit this sort of peak of the peak of inflated expectations. And then various companies who sort of tried to adopt them and have seen the hype and thought, right, we've got to do this, we've got to deploy this technology. They then come across the reality of using that technology in a complex work environment, and it then triggers a sort of what they call the trough of disillusionment, and it then rises again it either then becomes sort of obsolete before the plateau, it's seen as a failure, or it's overtaken by something else, or there's a slope of enlightenment as people work out how to deploy it effectively. And you'll see, according to Gartner this year, Gen AI is on its way down the trough of disillusionment. Basically, it's had a lot of hype, it's now hitting a lot of questions, and there's a lot of discussion about whether AI is just a bubble and stuff like that. And arguably it probably is a financial bubble. The Bank of England have flagged that. But if you're thinking about AI, Gen AI, Copilot in your organization and deploying it, then I think where you are trying to think about it from is not either the hype or the disillusionment, but what happens, or will it hit I suppose the first question is, will it hit the plateau of productivity? Is it here to stay? Will it be a set of tools we will want to use and you will want to have in use in your organization? And then if so, how do you deploy it? When do you deploy it, and how do you utilize it effectively? And what I'm really going to talk about in this session is not Gen AI generally, but one very specific bit of it, which is Power BI and the Copilot within Power BI. And what I'm really going to focus on here is, I suppose, what the actual Copilots do generally, what they do in Power BI, how you should think about whether you should use it, and then if you are going to use it, how I think to get the most out of it, how to deploy it effectively and utilize it for your organization. What I'm not, I suppose, going to cover is beyond what I've talked about around generative AI, a full deep dive analysis of Gen AI, pros and cons, benefits, etc., which would be a different talk. I'm not really going to touch on the Power BI Copilots, which are targeted at developers. So these are ones that support, DAX coding, for example. And I think, again, what applies to them, I think, applies to most of the coding support Copilots. That they can be really beneficial, but they tend to benefit the developers with the most knowledge and experience in that language more than they do new developers, and they are not an alternative really to starting to learn DAX or data modeling or any of these sort of skills. I'm not going to dive into the detailed setup of Copilot within Power BI and within the Power BI tenant. And I'm not really going to touch on other tools which are focused at sort of end user analytics like Databricks Genie, although I will note I think the next tech talk is on Databricks Genie. So if you're interested in looking at alternatives, that is definitely one to pick up. So that's what I'm covering. I'm hoping that's broadly what everyone's expecting. So Gen AI and end user analytics. And I think for quite a while now, people have been saying, or posing the question, or saying the dashboard is dead. This was ThoughtSpot, who've been a leader in this space. I think this is what they were talking about in 2021. They said, it's dead. Gen AI is the latest nail in the coffin. That users want to be able to ask questions of data. It's that sort of interactive experience is much better for them than having to than other ones, and it is there. And to put a note of caution on this, I suppose I don't think the dashboard is dead. And I think the reason I don't think this is I think if you think about the definition that Stephen Few gave, and Stephen Few is a sort of leader in the field of data visualization, he described the dashboard as a visual display of the most important information needed to achieve one or more objectives, consolidated and arranged on a single screen so the information can be monitored at a glance. The highlighting is mine, but I think what he's talking about is something very specific, and I think will continue to have a role in the future. And I don't think that sort of dashboard is dead. I think there will always be need to easily monitor common, clearly understood metrics in an organization in an easy to understand way, presented easily and clearly for users. But as someone who's built a lot of Power BI reports and seen a lot of Power BI reports, I'm not sure they all fall into that category, that definition. And the same is true of a lot of the Tableau, Click and other tools I've looked at, that when you see a lot of what sometimes people call a dashboard, sometimes a report, what you find is there's a lot of different pages to click through. There's a lot of different slices to click through on the page. There's a lot of different visuals to take in and look at. And there's a lot of users exporting data out of the tools into Excel. And I personally built a lot of that for all sorts of reasons, because that's what I've been asked to do, because people weren't sure what they wanted, because actually what people wanted was to explore and discover data, which is a perfectly reasonable thing, and a dashboard that gave them that flexibility, or a report that gave them the flexibility was something that met their needs. I've also ended up building them because the budget meant I couldn't serve every request that there was, and so something that met a lot of different needs, probably not well in every case, but met all of those needs, certainly a way to help and move things forward. But actually, a large portion of what I've built over the years doesn't meet the sort of Stephen Few definition of a dashboard. And my sense is, and my feeling is, that actually that is where generative AI, Gen AI, these sort of AI people putting in chat questions about their data certainly can fill a role. I know personally that within the organization that I often have questions, how much budget is left in a particular project, who might be available for adding to a project, what work have we done with a particular client recently, and I can find that information. I can go on to Power BI, I can open a page, I can click on a different page, I can apply some filters to find the client, the project, the skills I want, and I can get an answer. But certainly it would be easier for me if I could just type my question, or even ask my question over the mic and get an answer without having to go through all of those different slices and clicking through the pages and knowing what to find. And so I think for those use cases, I think this sort of generative AI, the Copilot experience, the ability to ask questions, is something that's quite attractive, really. It's quite helpful for people who want to get an answer to a question and I think is something that will fill a need. And I think will therefore not become obsolete, but will hit that plateau of productivity where there is a general expectation amongst people that accessing that sort of information should be based on being able to ask a question. However, it's important to remember what the co-pilots do generally and what the one in Power BI can do and will do. And I think, again, the highlighting here is on mine. This is from Microsoft's landing page about Copilot, but you'll really notice the two bits of achieve more in less time, amplify productivity. These tools are designed to make users more productive. So if you think about the scenario I just talked about, it's about not having to spend your time finding the right report, finding the right page, clicking on all the slices you want, getting the answer you want, or finding the bit of data you want in a table, exporting it to Excel, doing a few more formulas. It's about quickly being able to get hold of the information you want. It's about making individual users more productive. And therefore, it's important to think what that means for an organization. And I think and therefore, what also they don't deliver. And the two things I really want to flag with people are, one, deploying the co-pilots doesn't really automatically deliver cashable benefits to you as an organization, doesn't deliver an automatic return on investment that is cashable. So that's great. Everyone in your organization is a little more productive because in meetings they don't have to take the same level of notes or whatever. But that doesn't necessarily mean, unless you employ people whose only job is to take notes in meetings, and these days in most meetings I've ended up in over the last few years, it's someone's job to take it, but it's not their entire job. So actually, it's quite hard to get a cashable benefit out of it that will actually reduce your costs. Everyone in that meeting may be slightly more productive because they don't have to take notes or because they don't have to apply all the slices to the report, but very few people's jobs is just looking at reports. If you think about a sales team who have access to reports, their job is to sell. Looking at the reports is a way to help them do it, but it's not their key role in their job. So they may save some time getting information they want, for example, on previous engagements with clients, but it doesn't mean that you're going to reduce the number of sellers that you've got in the organization on the basis of it. And so I think it's important in that sense, but also they're not without cost as well. There's licensing costs. In the case of the Power BI one, you obviously need to be paying for a Fabric capacity, but there's also a cost attached to the use of Copilot within Power BI. Not an immediately billable one, but the more people who use Copilot, the more they ask questions of Copilot, the more successful it is, the more it will load extra compute onto your capacity. And if you have a very successful implementation of Power BI Copilot, you'll eventually find that you need to get a bigger, Fabric SKU in order to host your Copilot. That is, one of the challenges with Gen AI, I think more generally, that successful Gen AI projects tend to rapidly see the user costs of them increasing. Now, I've said I don't think they deliver cashable benefits. I will say this may change in the future. Perhaps, it will shift. And again, everything I say around this subject to change. It's an area where the technology is changing rapidly. Even, the Copilot software regularly sees within Power BI updates every month at the minute. So it is a changing area. I'd also say, because the other thing you could say is, does it mean we need less analysts? Does it mean we don't, that people will no longer be looking at reports? And I think, again, therefore we can reduce the number of analysts we have within an organization. Again, I think I'm still not sure that's the case at the minute. That people, as I'll talk about later, still need to build the models for the Copilot, and B, a lot of what an analyst does is more than just looking at a dashboard and applying the slices. Sure, if you've got a simple question as an analyst, it may increase your productivity because you can type in the answer in, the question into a dashboard and then send the answer back to someone. But actually, analyzing the data, really working with the user to understand what they, or the person who's asked for some information, what they actually want, and undertaking that analysis is a lot more work than just this. And I think, as you'll see with Power BI Copilot and the other Gen AI tools, as you get into quite complex bits of analysis, they still can't quite deliver it. But it may change. Things are changing, and I suppose I've had a number of conversations with people about, well, what skills do we need in the current environment? And as much as you need, I think, technological skills, I think that what you also need to be able to do is work with stakeholders, and I think you also need those sort of broad line underlying skills about how to communicate with data. I think the other thing is important to say that copilots don't deliver by default is data-driven decisions. And I've had, I end up having a number of conversations with people in organizations who contact me and say, right, well, we've got all these reports, I'm looking at the reports, what can we do about this? And often they come with a proposal in mind to say, well, it's because of the design of the reports, can you help with a redesign? Or it's because of data, data literacy, the users don't understand it, we need to do some data literacy work. Or actually, increasingly over the last year, what we need is to make it easier for people to get access to the data. That Copilot will help by making it easier for people to access the data. And just making it easier is not going to lead to data-driven decisions. We've been down that journey quite a while now, where we were going to have self-service dashboards. Will make it easier. People will be able to access the data, and they'll make data-driven decisions. And just making the data easier to access doesn't lead to that. That is about the culture of your organization. It's about those sort of data culture questions, and you need to build up and develop that culture. And if you're sitting here and thinking about the challenge actually is we don't make data-driven decisions, or people don't use our existing suite of reports, the first thing I'd say before starting on a Copilot journey or implementation is actually try and understand why people are not using the existing data and information they have. And there's a lot of ways to approach it. Certainly, I've supported patients with a mixture of sort of surveys and focus groups, but actually at its simplest, you can look at who the intended audience for a report is, go and have a coffee with them, ask them why do you, you're supposed to use the report, why don't you use it, what could be better, what could be different. And I think if you want to create data-driven decisions and a data culture, that is a different challenge which requires a lot more than just deployment of Copilot. So that's what Copilots don't deliver. But what do they deliver? Do they work? What is here? And as I say, do feel free to put any questions in the chat if you want to. And here is a Power BI report on screen, which hopefully has appeared for everyone. This one has got a lot of standard bits of a report. It's got lots of tabs for people to look through and see different areas and find different bits of the report. But this is also sitting in a Fabric capacity, and we've enabled Copilot on it. And so I can click the button here and start typing in my questions. And this one has all of the property sales in England and Wales since 1994 up till whenever I last refreshed the data, which was 2nd of October, I think, and would have probably had the data up till August or September. So it's got quite a big data there, and I could, if I wanted to answer a question, go into one of the tabs, apply my slicers and filters, and get an answer. Or I could type or even speak my question into the report, but in the interest of let's put it in here. In the interest of speeding it up, I've pre-written it. So this asks what the average property price in the CT10 postcode area, which is where I live down in Thanet in Kent, so Margate, Broadstairs, Ramsgate, that sort of area. And what was it in 24? And I can click on this and Copilot will work on it. It will, it's a big data set, so it's probably going to take a little bit of time, and it tells me that there. So if my question was, what was the average property price somewhere, it's quite quick, and I can, obviously vary that and can ask what it was in 2023, and it will tell me this. And again, very good. It's gonna run through the data, try and find the answer, and give me a response, hopefully. When it tells me it was £1 million, that seems like quite a big difference. And you might be thinking, wow, that is a big change in property prices. I know the property market is a bit odd, and has had a few ups and downs, but a crash of average price that much seems a bit weird. And it's true. That is, and you might be thinking the answers are wrong. This is a hallucination, or you might be thinking, well, it's the coast, so there are some big fancy houses here. You pay a premium to live by the sea. But actually, it is right, and it's the reason it is because this is all property sales at the minute, not just residential sales, and this includes the sale of an entire out-of-town shopping centre, which I think sold for 54 million quid. So it has distorted the average slightly. So that, I can see how this is useful if I've got some questions of the data. I could go in here and I could go in here and say, start applying my slicers. So I've already pre-selected it, but then I won't need to go in here if I've not already typed it in. And the traditional way would be, right, well, what was it for 2023? Okay, I can do this. And then I can get my figures at the top here. And I can, just to confirm it in the traditional way, 1.2. Then we'll change that one and go to 2024, and I'll get that one. So I can, I think simple demo, but you can see how for end users who have some questions about the data and just want to know something, it's quite simple. So any of my colleagues who are looking to buy a house somewhere can do a quick search, get an area, for different bits and different bits of information about property in a particular area. Quite useful. It's easier typing it, and particularly if you're using a chat to text functionality, even easier just to sort of ask the question out loud. So that's, I think the promise of Copilot. That's what it can do. I think that is the potential, and I think that is why, whether it is Copilot or other generative AI tools that allow people to explore data, are probably here to stay, and are things that organizations should be thinking about how they use and how they deploy them. However, all of that said, what should you do if you are thinking about deploying it? I'm not, as I go through how I think you should manage and consider deployment, one of the things I will come on to is some of the challenges, and I'll come back to this report to show you some of the challenges that are there, both with the Copilot as a tool and with more generally with the sort of generative AI tools, because it's still not it's simple, it's easy to do, just switch it on, and I'm not going to wait for that to load. So, and I guess this is what I said, deploying it in your organization, you can see the potential. Your senior executives are demanding a chat experience of data. Various people are saying, well, we've got it in Teams. That's really good. Why do we have to still go onto these reports and apply all these slicers? Why can't I just type my question in? It would be much easier if I could do that, etc. And I think the first thing, and I suppose my big bit of advice for these, is don't just, switch it on. I know Microsoft like to leave it left on by default these days, but actually, I think to get the most out of it and to build trust in it, it is something that you need to have an approach to and a plan to, and really think about how you deploy it effectively within your organization. It's not just about turning the button on. And in fact, nearly all of the other tools that you see in this area, whether it is ThoughtSpot or Genie and stuff, require a lot of work in the background to build before you even get to switch it on. Whereas Power BI Copilot allows you just to switch it on but actually doing the work beforehand will make it a much more successful thing. And when approaching it, this is how, how I would, how I approach it, how I suggest organizations approach it. And the first really is, to define your use case for Copilot. Who are the audience? Who are you expecting to use Copilot within your organization, or any other tool for that matter? And what will they be using it for? What questions are they looking to answer for it? Because I think if it's everything, anything, then I think you're sort of creating a real challenge for yourself if it's all the data. And then I'd also ask myself, how do they consume data now? And if the answer is they don't consume data now, they don't use reports, they don't use data, that cycles you back to my point about understanding why they're not using data now. That's a question about shaping the culture of your organization. But it's also important to understand what change journey you're taking them on, because if you want to take them from, say, using Excel to Copilot, that's a change. It's a change in the way they approach it, and you have to factor in managing that change. Secondly, what business value are you hoping that Copilot is going to help deliver within your organization? And I think with any piece, any data-related request, any project, any report, any dashboard, any piece of analysis, any piece of machine learning, I suppose really the two factors are, what's it going to deliver? What positive value is it? And I always try and attach it to sort of one of four key drivers. Is it increasing the revenue of the organization? Is it helping decrease the costs? Is it helping increase productivity and reduce, or is it helping to reduce the risk to the organization? They're the four big drivers for data and analytics within an organization, I find. And so one of them, maybe you're saying, right, it's going to make people more productive. They're spending X amount of time wading through dashboards, so this is going to help increase their productivity. That's fine, but also the report itself should also be delivering some value. The Copilot there, the data they're looking at, they should be looking at that data to increase the revenue, etc. And then secondly, have a think about what it's going to cost, both in terms of the work to deliver it, and also, if it's successful, how many people are you expecting to use it? How often? If your Fabric capacity is already bouncing up its usage limits now and hitting that red line in the capacity metrics app, then possibly, you may need to factor in a different capacity for it, or more capacity, or an expanded capacity. So think about what the cost will be. What will make it successful? So, you've created this Copilot. How many, what will define the success? How are you going to measure whether it has increased productivity or increased revenue or reduced the risk? What will a successful Copilot rollout be? Because if you've just created a report with Copilot enabled on it and people are not using it, you've spent time building out a report, but is it a successful one? And the final bit I always suggest is, what's the MVP? What's the minimum you need to build out a Copilot? What's the minimum you need to test whether it will work for your organization, whether it fits your needs? And these I think are good questions to ask of any data project you're doing. And I think often more time spent thinking about these things saves engaging in effort that doesn't really lead to any realizable benefit for organizations. So I think spending some time thinking about your use case, and is the first step that I recommend and suggest people start. And I think this applies whether it's a dashboard, whether it's Gen AI, whether it's a particular piece of analysis. Asking these questions can really help shape what you do. And then, assuming you've decided you have got a use case and you've worked out what it's for and who's going to be using it, all of these things, obviously, you want to start building out your Copilot. And here, I want to say really the sort of, from a Power BI perspective, the data modeling matters, I think, really a lot here. The design of the underlying model behind the data that you're going to be looking at makes a huge difference as to the sort of success or accuracy of the answers you're going to get. I think this is perhaps that, and this is where Copilot sort of, I think it almost pretends that you can just switch it on, whereas the other tools, you have to build out the background engine a little bit. But unless you've got really nice, pristine data models already in your organization, which my experience isn't the case in most organizations, just switching it on is going to create problems for you. So you're going to build a data model. First bit obviously is the data. Does it have the right data? The data that is going to answer the questions your users have. Because if you think back to the report we looked at before around property prices, this is the price paid data set. So there's a couple of challenges with it. I obviously mentioned that somewhere there was a 54 million quid, somewhere in here is a 54 million quid property for 2023. But that is because it includes non-residential sales. And if people are only interested in residential sales, that's a challenge. So I could filter it out, but the data set is a little tricky, and you don't really have within the core data set a commercial non-residential split. You have other, but that may include some residential property, so it's not completely reliable. The other thing the data set doesn't have, and if you're thinking about looking at house prices, for example, it doesn't have the key question, which often is the number of bedrooms in the property, which is often, you think about Rightmove, if you go on there, it's often one of the filters you're going to end up applying. So does it have the data that will actually meet the questions your users are going to ask is an important question. The other important question, and it's an obvious one, is data quality. I'm not going to labor that point because it's true for any report you produce. If data quality is bad, the answers will be bad. It's no different. Copilot doesn't currently, and AI doesn't currently solve the issue of bad data quality underlying it. The second thing is language. And here there's a couple of different bits that I think are important, really. One, does it use the language of the users? Is it, or is it, do all the column names reflect some weird code in a database that an engineer created a decade ago? Are there, not natural spaces in the names? Have people, does it fit that natural language that the users have? Or is it, the sort of code-based one? And secondly, Power BI particularly, but all of these tools have the ability to add definitions, descriptions, synonyms in there, so that you can offer more context for what the user, what the actual measure means. And very often they are not populated. The number of models I end up looking at where, definitions or descriptions have not been populated is by far and away the vast majority of them. So you're going to have to spend some time making sure that you've added in those descriptions. And I will say for Copilot, the description, if you've got Copilot, there is for measures at least to use Copilot to populate your measure descriptions, and it seems to do quite a good job, particularly with the simple measures. So that's definitely worth looking at and worth using. But yeah, you're going to have to spend time populating it, following that sort of best practice out. The other question is, does it have ambiguity? And ambiguity, I think, includes both sort of the business ambiguity and model ambiguity. When people in your organization use a term, do they all mean exactly the same thing? When someone says profit, does everyone have the same common definition of that? I used to work at King's College London. I used to work at university, and the organizational structure there was somewhat complex, and the first tier down, if you want to think about it, of academic organization, most of them were called faculties. So you might think someone would ask, could you summarize the number of students by faculty? However, Some of them were also called institutes. Some of them were called schools, business school. So that's quite a complex question there. And then the next tier down, some of them were also called institutes and schools, but they were part of a faculty. So actually that business ambiguity is quite hard to navigate as a person who's responsible for answering that question. And you will probably know if you're, that you need to select it, but by default, if I was at King's and typed in summarize students by faculty, I might not get all of those in the correct answer. So complicated. Secondly, there's the question of model ambiguity, and here I'm talking particularly around, partly the technical stuff around Power BI. If you've built a model with sort of many-to-many relationships and bi-directional filters and all of that stuff, which people have talked about around best practice and stuff that isn't really that star schema, you're introducing ambiguity into the model, which is going to make writing measures more complex, but also Copilot interpreting your data more complex and lead to a greater risk of it getting the wrong answer. And that model ambiguity can also just be built a sort of combination of business and model ambiguity. If you've got that sort of someone says location, and you've got like two location tables, the location of your customer and the location, say, for example, of your store. And someone says, what are our sales by location? Two location tables. Again, that ambiguity is already in that model. So you have to think about how to manage that. The final bit is just that sort of, I suppose, it's followed best practice, and Microsoft in terms of Copilot have documented it fairly well. I personally say, personally would recommend starting with simple defined use cases. Don't try and answer every question in a single Copilot, but find a use case which actually, creates a manageable, simple data model that you're going to maximize the chances of it delivering. And I think, this is important because here it can be a significant challenge. So, but I want to say as well, within the tools within Copilot, and if you really think about it and design it and work with your users, you can overcome a lot of these, but you're going to have to spend a bit of time being prepared to iterate. So I could say, for example, here, let me find my pre-typed question, because it will save me typing and misspelling it. So I might think, right, well, I've asked here what the average is. And clearly, as I've got this £154 million price, it's massively throwing out the average. So I could reasonably say, right, well, what was the median property price in the CT10 postcode area? And we'll see if we get an answer for this one. Certainly when I've tried it before, it tells me I can't have an answer. So we'll see what I get. Yep, it says, again, you can see this, I can't calculate the median because it doesn't have. Now, actually, it does have. So it says, sorry, I can't calculate the median property price for CT10 in 2023 because there isn't a property price column or a measure available in your data. However, now actually, at the minute, the row level data would support that calculation. So if I'm building out this as a model, I then write, well, so average is not necessarily the best thing to ask. So therefore, I need to write a median calculation, and I've deliberately not done it in this demo. So I need to put in that median calculation to help with that, and I could help solve it. Equally, if I ask for the address, it won't give me the address. It will throw out the wrong answer. Because there isn't an address field, there's a separate set of columns. So again, it's a solvable problem, but you need to think about it. And then as you go through it, you need to test it, you need to iterate it as you're deploying it. If someone wants an address, then you need to give them a column which is going to give them that full address. You need to make a decision, in my case, as to whether it's better to just have median and tell it it's average. The only reason it currently understands that CT10 is a postcode area is because I've told it that, and Power BI does have that capacity to build that out. But you need to test it, you need to look at how it's being used, and I think literally you need to sit down with people who are using it and watch them use it, see what questions they're asking, and build out a model which is really going to help them. You can start with a small group and roll it out. As I said, it's new, so you need to communicate with people how they use it, How to ask good questions. Again, if I asked, for example, average property price on the model I've looked at, it would give me it for the entire life cycle of the data. So people need to understand that the more information they give it, the better the answers they will get. And you need to evaluate what you've built, see if it's worked, see if it's meeting the needs, is it meeting the success criteria you've defined, and iterate. You know, it's something where you are going to hit people asking questions, not getting the right answer, and you're going to have to think about that with model design. So what's my conclusion? So I suppose broadly my conclusion is that Copilot and tools like it are here to stay. I think they do serve a useful function. I don't think they replace a dashboard, but I think the ability to ask questions of data rather than applying lots of slicers and navigating quite complex reports is certainly attractive to me, and I can see how it's attractive to other users. But if you're going to deploy it, you need to think about that. You need to have a plan, you need to test it, and you need to iterate around it. So that's my broad conclusion. There's my contact details as well, but I don't know if there are any questions. I can't see any in the chat, but if anyone does have any questions, let's have a look. Oh, sorry, I've found the questions. Can you capture the questions being asked? Copilot will, doesn't quite give you all of the questions being asked, but you can. There are ways to find out what's being asked and to begin to iterate on it. But I think sitting down with you before you do it is almost sit down with people as they're asking it in that sort of almost focus groupy style is a good way to start off. And can you switch it on for one report? Yes, you can at the minute. You can also mark data sets as Copilot ready, so you can do it in a gradual sort of way. And I think that's probably the best way to do it. Can you turn Copilot on for, sorry, yeah, and Databricks allows you to monitor questions, yeah. And as I said, there are a range of different tools here. You know, this is about Copilot, but you've got Databricks Genie. You've also got the Fabric AI agents, there, you know, ThoughtSpot. There's a whole range of different tools that go into this. And I think I would say that, you know, which one you choose depends on what stack you've got within your organization and what you want, which one people are used to using. Can you turn Copilot on for users only rather than switching it on for developers? I suppose from Sam, I suppose the answer to that one is yes, because ultimately it's about security groups rather than, so you can't turn on the specific functionality overall for specific groups, if that makes sense, but you can turn on Copilot for groups of individuals using the security groups. I'd say for developers, it's easier to just, you know, they're a relatively small number, and you know, you can sort of manage them almost at an individual level. But if you want to use Copilot as a developer, you also need to attach the work, the Power BI report, to a Fabric-enabled workspace. Hopefully that answers the questions. Any other questions from anyone else? If people do have any, they can reach out to me. My details are here, but also what we've also got, if you're interested, is there's a sort of complimentary 1-hour discovery where me or one of my colleagues will, you know, work through Copilot use cases with you, think about the options for deploying it in your organization and how you might do it. We, Telefónica Tech, recently achieved Copilot jump start status. So in some cases, and it depends on, you know, individual customers and stuff, there is also some funding available for Copilot related projects. Whether it would apply, you know, we'd have to work out. But if you are interested in beginning to look at how you might deploy Copilot within your organization, then do reach out. I think it's not one of those things that long term it's just going to go away. And by that, I mean, Gen AI and asking questions of data is not going to go away. So thinking about how you utilize it, and also building out those proof of concepts helps you manage expectations within your organization as well. And I think the final thing to say is, for those that are interested in other talks, we've got a couple more coming up. The next one is, as I said, highlighting Databricks Genie. So if you want to see Databricks Genie and talk about how that might be an alternative if you're currently using Databricks, then register for that one. And then we've got an end of year review panel as well with our CTO in December, which should be interesting. And yeah, I think that is everything. So I think we're almost at the time I said. So unless anyone has any other questions, which I can't see any new ones going into the chat, please enjoy the rest of your day. And goodbye.